Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Thursday, September the 9th, 2021. So, I've been convicted of lèse-majesté by one of Canada's premier intersectional feminists. Yes, it's a pretty big day for me. What is lèse-majesté? I'll read from Wikipedia. It's a French term meaning to do wrong to majesty, an offense against the dignity of a reigning sovereign or against a state. This behavior was first classified as a criminal offense against the dignity of the Roman Republic. In the Dominate or Late Empire period, the emperors eliminated the republican trappings of their predecessors and began to equate the state with themselves. Narrower conceptions of offenses against majesty as offenses against the crown predominated in the European kingdoms that emerged in the early medieval period. In feudal Europe, some crimes were classified as lèse-majesté, even if they were not intentionally directed at the crown. And this lasted for a long time. In Britain, one could be charged with lèse-majesté, and it wasn't abolished until 2010, I think. But to get to the heart of the matter here, it concerns a woman called a doctor, and she is a doctor, and she won't let you forget it. Muna Salah. B.Ed, University of Alberta, M.Ed, University of Alberta, Ph.D., University of Alberta. Isn't that considered a no-no? It was my understanding, and I spent a lot of time working in academia, that you had to, if you're going to have 3 degrees, there had to be at least 2 universities to avoid, the consideration that you were, someone's pet there. But let's get to it here. She teaches at Concordia University of Edmonton, which is a university I didn't even know existed until today, despite having lived in Edmonton for 5 years. It's only become a university fairly recently. It began as a Lutheran college, a Lutheran high school, actually, in the early part of the latter century. But we have, school inflation. Every community college aspires to become a university, and many of them do. So Dr. Muna Salah is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at Concordia University of Edmonton, drawing upon her experience as a Canadian Muslim woman, mother to Malik Ahmed and Maya, educator and researcher. Muna's doctoral research was a Killam Trust-funded narrative inquiry into the experiences of Canadian Muslim girls and their mothers. Prior to engaging in graduate studies, she was an elementary and secondary school teacher and leader. Her research interests include multi-perspectival narrative inquiry, mothering and motherhood, conceptions of curriculum, familial curriculum making, and research alongside children and youth with exceptionalities and their families. Yes, her doctoral dissertation, Stories We Live By, With, and In, a narrative inquiry into the experiences of Canadian Muslim girls and their mothers. Yes, such a titanic contribution to scholarship. Here's a paper from 2018, Stories to Rename By, with the R-E in brackets, relationally living and inquiring within the multi-layered midst. Another one of her papers, dwelling together in the depths of not knowing. Another paper from 2008, keywords in the social studies, concepts and conversations. Well, I understand what that means. From 2015, curriculum making magic, playfully composing lives and community. A review of the book, The Boy on the Beach, Building Community Through Play. a paper from 2015, A Narrative Conception of Professional Development as a Nested Community, again from 2015, Embracing Lived Multiplicities as Beginning Narrative Inquirers. And from 2014, Autobiographical Narrative Inquiry, Tellings and Retellings. Yes, yes, again, an intellectual titan of our time. She had tweeted something which I found, well, hilarious, actually. She was responding to Dean Scoreko, who had tweeted "F you terrorist supporter." She's a Palestinian. She responded, "When you have nothing of use / intelligence to say, you resort to pointing out someone's cultural heritage. What an absolute POS." Also, as always, I am proud to be a Palestinian. And she had described herself as racialized, which is a term which a great many people use now. Oh, yeah, that's a word now, is it? And it actually has a meaning. So she reported Dean Scoreko to Twitter, and she wasn't happy with the response. So Twitter support says that they need more info about how this account violated their code of conduct, but I can't provide screenshots and the tweet has been deleted. But even if it wasn't, I'm blocked. This is how racists stay on your site and make it miserable for racialized women. And so I responded, who racialized you? Be specific. Because, of course, she does belong to a race, the Palestinian race, and she never tires of reminding us of this. But somehow white people racialized her. And no one had ever thought in terms of race before white people decided to impose this wicked typology on the world. Of course, she seems to have done very well for herself in Canada. But it hasn't made her happy. Perhaps she would be happier back in her homeland. But she definitely felt the sting of lèse-majesté. And she responded, she blocked me. But of course, you know, there are other means to find out what she says. This is the kind of random shit I've been highlighting. The sheer fucking audacity. How dare you? How dare you? It's just too funny. So I made a screenshot, a retweet, and I responded, of course, not directly to her because I can't. Ooh, not just audacity, but sheer fucking audacity. I see I've been convicted of lèse-majesté, but by one of our new Palestinian overlords, those who intone racialism as if it is a word of great import, might as well say abracadabra or quack quack. They all mean the same. And then the simping began. Oh no, a woman has been criticized on Twitter. The queen is under attack. Must protect the hive. And that's precisely what happened to me, with hilarious results, with just the simping. The simping is out of control. And this is what typically happens, is that a bunch of people decide to simp for some woman. And I have had no communication with these people. And then they attack me. And then when I respond in kind, I'm accused of being a bully. Yes, they always do that. And there was a hilarious response from some woman from the Indian subcontinent. Like, how dare you attack this woman? Apologize and delete your account. Why? Why would I want to? Why would I want to do that exactly? And she pointed out that she is a person of color and an anti-racism educator. Well, I was pretty impressed. But I couldn't help but have some fun with her, nonetheless. You think standing up for a woman makes me a simp? I'm fine with that. Are you okay being the kind of dude that harassed women online? I asked the doctor a question. Who racialized you? Because this doesn't seem to be explained ever. It just supposedly happened. It's not that far away from the Black liberation theology story of Yakub. Are you familiar with this? He had a big throbbing brain, and for some inexplicable reason, one day he felt particularly evil and decided to create white people. Yes, this is a cornerstone of Black liberation theology. So someone called Sarah Kelly attacked me. I knew a woman called Sarah Kelly, but I'm certain that this Sarah Kelly is a different person. And so, I responded in kind. And again, how dare you? How dare you attack Sarah Kelly? Well, who's Sarah Kelly when she's at home? Someone called fully vaxxed infinite chimps, he, him. Yeah, that's what it says. Whose avatar is absolutely terrifying. Responded, why are you obsessed with me, Kevin? Took you no time at all to comment on my appearance. Guess you don't really have a depth of knowledge. This was after he had attacked me about 6 or 8 times. Your abusive tendencies are nasty, man. Seek psychological help. Oh no, a right-wing slander, douchebag, misogynistic pig. Get a life and a dictionary. There's someone called Sammy Fuad responded, you should get deported into the sun so you stop randomly harassing people of color on social media. And before that, Kevin, you were an embarrassment, and Sarah is capable of eating you for breakfast, but you aren't worth her time. Just stop. But Sarah didn't eat me for breakfast, whatever that might mean. And this has happened to me, several times. And again, it is always the same, and it never stops being hilarious. Someone called Miss Vanjie resorted, just the basic, and I got a lot of this. Fuck off, Kevin. And I noted in response, Palestinian flag every time. I mean, I'm sure there are people who have Palestinian flags in their Twitter account who are not angry and deranged, but that has not been my experience. Oh, more on Dr. Munna. I never swear on here, but fuck intellectualizing obvious war crimes. The videos and images tell the story, even if you don't have a PhD. Like me, I have a PhD in education, which used to be just worthless, but is now actively inimical to civilization. Dr. Munna had tweeted on June the 22nd, it will never fail to amaze me that people view Palestinians' right to resist occupation, including throwing stones against the world's most powerful armies, as aggressive action. When people were throwing gravel at Justin Trudeau the other day, that was certainly seen as aggressive. Just gravel, not stones. Of course it is aggression. Whether you consider it justifiable is another thing entirely. These people have had no experience of opposition. Someone like Dr. Munna, people have been saying yes, yes, yes to her whole life. Oh, we're so grateful that such a strong, talented Palestinian woman like yourself is in Canada. What can we do for you? How can we help along your rent seeking. Yes, Amanda. And pronouns. Pronouns from all of these people. Is this a fucking joke? Apologize to Dr. Muna Salah and delete your account. Imagine being a racist this loudly. And of course, I merely queried, who racialized you? Be specific. Be specific. Yes. Muna Salah's cheerleaders are a regular Algonquin round table. Some very annoying virtue signaler called DeBo O's, who's got some, Real Housewives avatar. Who radicalized you? Be specific. And I responded, insufferable, affluent, white, female liberals like you. Again, someone is disagreeing with us. What are we going to do? How about screaming obscenities? That should work. Oh no, it's not working. It's not working. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan, Palpicasso 88, and Run. Chogakin's a six Kontiki roulette. Oh, what sort of reading material is that on Kevin's bed? Can you see this? Common Ground is a magazine that's been around forever, and the owner-publisher is so fed up with this sanitary dictatorship that he decided to devote the whole issue to it. And here's the verse. Clever graphic, I must say. Well realized. Metal Mike says KMG Sweden already has the microchip in the hand ID, and people are volunteering in the thousands, and many places no longer accept cash. David Wright says, my somewhat red-pilled Sivnat brother just said what is happening to Australia can't happen here because we have a constitution. And I thought, I brought him so far. Soviet Union had a constitution. One of the best ones in the world was the Constitution of 1936. Come on. We've known for the longest time. Well, let's look at Canada here. When the Supreme Court was given the power in 1985 of judicial review, it gave itself the power to read things into the Constitution. When the new Constitution, or the amended Constitution of 1982 was being debated, Sven Robinson of the NDP pressed Jean Chrétien, who was then the Justice Minister, later Prime Minister, something like 13 times in committee to include gay rights to the Charter of Rights and Freedom, and Chrétien refused. So the Supreme Court said, no, we're just reading it in. We're just reading it in. So the Constitution in Canada means whatever the Critarchy says it does, just as it has long been the case in the United States. Steve says, I'll say it again, there are too many damn people going to university. Hello, Pitsky. Mary Crow says the problem with the world is that the intelligent are full of doubt and the stupid full of confidence, says, that's from Charles Bukowski. David Wright says nephew did a year training in welding, just got offered $35 an hour. Kontiki Roulette says she's very brave running to a country filled with white people. Yes, I was called entitled during this battle. I'm not entitled. I'm literally not entitled. White males are the only group in Canada that can be legally discriminated against. And this is written in to the Charter of Rights, laughingly named Section 15(2). There's a list of protected classes. White males are not there. Someone like Mina Salah, assuming that she is an immigrant, she's either an immigrant, her parents were immigrants. As soon as they got off the plane at Pearson, they had rights, privileges in terms of hiring and the like that I don't have. And when people talk about systemic racism in the United States, white supremacy, I urge you all to bring this up, because it's the same situation in the United States. Because someone who gets off a plane from Hyderabad at JFK, they have privileges immediately. They weren't in the country before. They didn't suffer under slavery, but they have privileges nonetheless. Okay. David Wright says, maybe the Wizard of Oz could give us one of those diplomas the Scarecrow got, then no more worries about appearing to be a stupid orc and move on to real jobs and possibly more money. Palpcasso 88, KMG says, did you see the story about the Ontario School Board that burned 4,700 books as an act of reconciliation, i.e. to atone for racism? I did see that. And actually not 4,700. 4,700 books were removed because supposedly they offend Indians. But in a hilarious sequel to that, the woman who was responsible for this has resigned as the Indigenous coordinator or whatever for the Liberal Party of Canada, because questions are being asked about whether she is actually Indigenous. And one of the Twitter feeds of somebody who was attacking me, there was some tweet about two young people, Indians or Indigenous, First Nations. The girl had blonde hair and green eyes, and the boy similarly had blonde hair. Just how Indian are they? 10%? 5%? Now, again, if we're going to give privileges, and tremendous privileges, as it turns out, to so-called Indigenous people, well, I guess we're going to have to come up with, Nuremberg laws like the Nazis had. Who actually is Indigenous? Because a lot of people have discovered that claiming to be Indigenous gets you on the gravy train. And physiognomy is real, KMG, says Dionysius. Indeed, it is. That saying comes from MPC, says Anrun. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Credit where due. No Sleep Till Breezewood PA says, whenever someone says, eat you for breakfast, I first check if the attacker is fat. Joken666 says, this was all because you asked who racialized you. I want to go back. To this woman, because she is such a piece of work. It's just amazing, the rage from this hijabbed woman, as I say, who has benefited greatly from being in my country. This is from May the 17th. You can't be in solidarity with Palestinians for freedom without understanding the intersecting oppressions of settler colonialism of Turtle Island, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, misogyny, and other systems. Stop the erasures. Turtle Island. Yeah, pull the other one. It's got bells on. How on earth would some Indian living on the prairies know that North America is an island? Well, it's not an island, actually. Never mind that, because it is contiguous with South America. Oh, when did I start hearing this? About 25 years ago, Turtle Island. What are you talking about? You just made this up. You made it up. And of course, she's complaining about Jason Kenney and his insufficiently panicked response to COVID-19. Oh, this is a classic. This should not need to be said, but this has been a common theme lately. You are not doing me a favor by inviting me to speak at your event. If you can't approach me with an awareness of this and with respect in general, don't bother approaching. Duly noted. To speak in an event, I suspect this woman is offered money, sometimes. If people want you to speak in an event, generally, it means that they have, respect for your views or admiration for you personally. Otherwise, why would they be asking you? Why would they be asking you? And Lèse-majesté is the perfect term to describe people like her. These rebarbative foreign rent seekers. Okay. Dr. Munna said on September 7th, you think these racist pieces of shit would have figured out that if you come for any one of my sisters, you better be ready for our collective response. We refuse to be harassed, smeared, or silenced here or anywhere else. She's the one who blocked me. I didn't block her. I don't block anyone except for those people who have sent me porn and those people who have threatened me. I mean, actually threatened me. Okay, so let's head over here. Metal Mike says, glad you're having fun on Twitter, KMG. Well, yes, I am. It's like Rick Dukeman said in that the movie The Burbs. You got to goose these people, once in a while, just to let them know that you're there. Because otherwise, they think they can get away with anything. David Wright says, most of my early conservative reading came from the Conservative Book Club in the 80s. Most of my conservative reading came from the Conservative Book Club, starting a little earlier in the 1970s. But no, it was great. It was absolutely great. Oh, a landmark in KMG Show history, the first visual aid, says Hauper. I suppose so. I suppose so. Ritual is form in action. Darren Caligari. This is from Red Sulfur. Let's see. Bartender at Starbucks told me they don't carry white sugar anymore based on corporate decisions, says Red Sulfur. Is that really true? I suppose it could be. Rick in the Burbs is one of the greatest characters of all time, says Oscar Toe. Yeah, Rick Dukeman, he was from Vancouver. I gather he had, enormous troubles with his weight, and he died quite early, well, relatively anyway, and he never really had the career that he should have, which is a shame. So, yes, let's move on to virtual violence. Scandal of the week. And here's a tweet from someone called Ari Drennan, described, this person has 23.5 thousand followers, described as ice queen, feminist, poet, beautiful, but dangerous. Oh, and described by Emily Vanderwerf. Emily Vanderwerf used to be some male name Vanderwerf, and I used to run into this person's reviews on the AV Club. Terrible. And then, married. He was to a woman, and then one day he was Emily, and of course, it's all been retconned. So I guess if you're praised by Emily Vanderwerf, that's pretty strong stuff. So Ari Drennan tweets, I cannot believe that in 2021, why didn't Ari just say in the current year, the New York Times would hire cis male concern haver Jesse Singal to review a book by cis female concern haver Helen Joyce about trans people, but I assure you that none of the people involved have the faintest idea what the fuck they're talking about. These people want a transsexual dictatorship. They have determined that they are at the very top of the pyramid, and they're just going to rain thunderbolts down on anyone who dares disagree with any of them about anything. So someone called Brittany de la Crétaz, and I don't advise looking at this person's avatar, writing sports, gender, and queerness. The Z is silent. Good to know. They, them, rainbow, and then the transgender flag, and then the Star of David. I believe that Pamela Paul, NYT, that's Pamela Paul, the editor of the New York Times Book Review, and whoever was responsible for assigning and editing this review needs to answer for it. It's violent. As a trans author, well, what do you want? A medal? Has every trans person written a book now? Or is that their destiny, that every one of them must write a book about their struggle? As a trans author, I'm devastated to see the paper of record run this anti-trans, concern-trolling propaganda under the guise of a neutral review. This isn't just an oversight. The NYTBR and Pamela Paul hired someone to review a book about trans people who has a page on the GLAAD Accountability Project for his anti-trans journalism. It's journalistic malpractice. Wow. So the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against This Demonstration has a page about a writer, so that means that that writer cannot be published because the alphabet people, it's their world now. We just live in it. I feel so much despair, anger, grief about this in a way I didn't expect. Oh, really? We expected it. I'm devastated about what the future means for us and how we can come back from this political and cultural moment. We are not hypothetical thought experiments. We are people, and MSN is causing us so much harm. Tim Arsenault at AB Drummer made the obvious riposte. Good job removing all meaning from the word violent. Yes, violence means saying something or writing something with which I disagree. Glenn Greenwald responded, not only are cultural liberals insisting with a straight face that the New York Times committed violence by publishing a book review by Jesse Singal, they're also urging punishing for the NYT editor for publishing someone on the blacklist they keep of prohibited writers. Greenwald continued, yesterday, I said that liberal journalists are herd animals who graze so closely with one another, never hearing dissent, that they believe they're smart. That's true, but they're also adolescents eternally stuck at the lunch table. Look how they behave toward the outcast. And Ashley Feinberg had tweeted, just phenomenal display name usage from the Sarah Kelly. That would be the Sarah Kelly that I mentioned earlier. Greenwald says, I actually think it would be darkly funny if the New York Times op-ed page editor gets fired at least once a year for doing violence by publishing someone who is on the blacklist maintained by cultural liberals. It'd be helpfully revealing. They really do believe it is literal violence. So let's have a look at Gawker, which is back. And Bigot reviews Bigot for New York Times Book Review. Why don't they go whole hog like that woman on McSweeney's a few days ago? It's just conjugating, the word fuck over and over again. Maybe they would have done that, but it's just been done. And there's a picture of a toilet. Claire Carusillo. It's a classic media story. One bigot head nods to the other across a busy room in recognition, but in the form of a book review. Yeah, that's a classic media story, all right. because the New York Times, for instance, the Washington Post, I mean, they're just full of bigots, This time it's Jesse. Gender is a fraught concept, single in the New York Times book review on Helen, Joyce's new book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality. First, summations of key terms. Joyce, a turfy journalist at The Economist, who is obsessed with other people's gonads. Ah, yes. Trans people saying that people who are not trans are obsessed with other people's gonads. Projection, chef's kiss. Defined as compassionate concessions that enable a suffering minority to live full lives in safety and dignity and the consummate terror of gender self-identification. Joyce interprets self-ID as a political theory that indoctrinated into children by other already indoctrinated children worldwide, in which people should count as men or women according to how they feel and what they declare, instead of their biology. According to Joyce, one is good, the other bad. Single, a man of willful ignorance who often misses the vast and well-documented forest of gender dysphoria for the trees. Great metaphor. Offers an example of what Joyce might mean when a fundamentalist strain of gender identity ideology takes hold in the form of an anecdote about a natal male pedophile and murderer being housed in a women's prison. In the same paragraph, Single equates that story with another one from the book about beauticians in British Columbia refusing to wax a trans woman's pubic area. But these may be straw natal male arguments. The review seems to be mostly concerned with gender non-conforming children being told their only real choice is to transition or to suffer forever. I cannot emphasize enough that the through line for both these writers is a concern for girls' and women's locker rooms, which to me seems extremely myopic and it's also sort of pervy. But hey, that's their business. Yes, for years and years and years, women said, we demand safe spaces. So they got them. Then about 10 years ago, a bunch of people who newly designated as women, formerly men, many of them, well, hulking and aggressive, said, these are not your spaces anymore. These are our spaces. And if you don't like it, you can clear off, because we are redefining what it means to be a woman. Yeah, that's right. And in fact, the term woman itself is offensive, just like the term mother is offensive. They should be called birthing persons, etc., etc., etc. So these people who seem to be perennially furious, steam coming out of their ears, accuse others who disagree with them of being angry or pervy or whatever. And of course, that woman, Brittany Dilla, whatever, she was one of those people. Oh, yes, the Wee Spa, that's a right-wing hoax. Turns out not a right-wing hoax. Not even close to being a right-wing hoax. Criminal charges there. Let's take a look at the chat. Chogokin 666, tremendously self-absorbed. No sleep till Breezewood PA says, well, Gawker hasn't changed at all. Let's reassemble the Hulkster Thiel tag team. Hysteria in the Freudian sense, not enough penile action or traction in their life. No way is Single talking about Chris Chan, says no sleep. Chogokin 666 says, there will soon come a time when these precious superfluidities will be rendered moot by the harsh fang of nature. Birthing persons is off now, says Kontiki Roulette, because it denies their right to kill babies. Consensual baby incubator is the correct phrase. Consensual. I'm just getting the impression, reading about the opposition of the Texas abortion law, that these people seriously believe that what? 80, 90, 95%, 99% of women in Texas who become pregnant were raped. Yeah, again, I have to say, after 2008, I thought that 2008 was a climactic that it was clear that capitalism was no longer delivering a surplus. And so much of the craziness which had been enabled by the surplus created by capitalism, it was all just going to wither away. But no, it didn't. Governments decided to borrow money, more money than they'd ever borrowed before, in part to keep the clown show going. And secondly, the NGOs stepped in. And back in 2008, I had no idea, nowhere near an idea of just how powerful NGOs are and how much money they have. Okay. Contiguous says, I wonder if black people have noticed white people avoiding them more vigorously since their hysterical meltdown last year. Okay, let's talk about the Canadian election. Rebel News won their lawsuit, and Justin Trudeau not happy about it. This is from Roberto Wakefield Cruz at the Post-Millennial. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau teed off on Rebel News journalist Tamara Ugolini after Wednesday's federal leadership debate after asking Trudeau why their news organization had to fight the federal government in court to ask him questions post-debate. Trudeau held no punches. Actually, the idiom is, okay. Calling the Rebel a website that spreads misinformation and disinformation regarding COVID data. Trudeau also said that the Rebel, which he refused to call a media organization, how very pissy of you, Justin, was partly responsible for the polarization we see in this country. No, deciding that a substantial minority of Canadians are going to be second-class citizens, that is in no way polarizing. That's merely science. Trudeau said the reality is that organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're actually going to get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is why we see such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. Quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization. Your group of individuals need to account for some of the polarization that we see in this country. And I think that Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a critical decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists. You mean like the ones that you gave $595 million of taxpayers' money to? That put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing you guys do. Yes, that may well be the most unintentionally hilarious thing ever uttered by a Canadian Prime Minister, that the Canadian media operates from a broad range of perspectives. Just one example. Not that long ago, two of the most prominent, right-wingers, if you will, in Canada were Michael Corrin and Charles Adler. It became clear to them a few years ago that if they maintained their, right-wing stands, which were not particularly right-wing, they would have no career in Canada. None. No one would publish them. They couldn't go on the air anyway. So both Adler and Corrin did a 180. And now they are ferocious opponents of the radical right in Canada. I don't know if there's anything like a radical right or even just what used to be known as a right. But they got the message. Everyone in the media has got the message. There are things that you can't say. And what you can't say is anything to the right of Erin O'Toole. Now, a lot of Canadians, just like a lot of Americans, have made money, an enormous amount of money, not through productive work, but simply by sitting on properties and riding the inflation gravy train. Under Canadian law, primary residences which sold, the profit can't be taxed. But now, something very strange has happened. This is from Jared Jager at Post-Millennial. Jason Hickey, a candidate for New Brunswick Southwest, revealed that under the Liberals, Canadians will pay tax on any profits they make from the selling of their primary residence. In a Facebook Live event, the Liberal candidate outlined his party's planned tax. Quote, "We have a lot of tax incentives for first-time homeowners, but of course, anyone selling their primary residence, you do make money on that, so unfortunately, you will have to pay a tax on that. I wouldn't agree to that either, but it's what we have to do." Following circulation of Hickey's clip, the Liberals took to Twitter claiming the video had been edited by the Conservatives to leave out a section where the candidate denied plans to institute a tax. And Michelle Rempel Garner, more on her shortly, Calgary MP. She has a very large head, a bobblehead. Shameful. What you posted here is from an entirely different section of the video, and you're misleading people that it was from the same section or that it was spliced. Your guy clearly said that if you make money on selling your house, you will have to pay tax on that. And now she's threatening to sue people, which is always a very bad look for a politician. But more on Michelle Rempel Garner, as she is now. Always more reviews. What needs to change is removing men from power who turn women against each other, reward silence that covers their sins, and who socialize women to maintain the status quo. Enough experiencing things differently, more justice. Shame on all the women and men who are silent on this issue to keep their nominations, to keep their cabinet spots. I have always and will always make these people uncomfortable. Justice should be the reward. Michelle Rempel Garner, radical feminist. Take that, men. She's this far from advocating that, men shouldn't be allowed to be MPs because they're always being mean to Michelle Rempel Garner. For instance, when it was discovered last year that she'd been still being paid as a Canadian MP, that she'd been living in Oklahoma for several months. And people had a lot of fun with that. She had an explanation for it, but of course people are going to have fun with something like that. But any criticism of Michelle Rempel Garner is misogyny and quite possibly violence as well. Now, people have asked me whether this is true, and I believe that it is true because Twitter has added a notification to it. And the notification is Officiel du Gouvernement Canada. This is Justin Trudeau's Twitter account. Houses shouldn't sit empty when so many Canadians are trying to buy a home. So we're going to ban foreign ownership in Canada for the next 2 years and tax the existing vacant foreign-owned properties. Wow. Pretty nativist of you. Traditional Canadian girl responded, "Why didn't you do it before? You had 6 years. Who is dumb enough to believe you'd magically do it now after you sold BC to China and locked out most Canadian home buyers? Buyers are forced to buy townhouses for the price of mansions. This is on you." Okay. So I certainly applaud the banning of foreign ownership of houses. But on the other hand, Justin Trudeau is going to be admitting more than 1.2 million Canadians as permanent residents. This leaves aside the hundreds of thousands of others, or perhaps another million or two, who come to Canada temporarily, and most of them don't leave. So they all have to live somewhere. There's been a lot of talk about the problem of home affordability in this election. No one is calling for an immigration moratorium. Maxime Bernier is calling for immigration rates to be cut in half, and apparently this makes him Hitler or something close to it. I wanted to talk about John Mullaney briefly. I don't know if you know of this man. He's a comedian. I was introduced to some of his routines, stage act, a few years ago, and I thought they were very, very funny. Then he was given his own sitcom, which was going to be different. It was going to be like pre-Seinfeld, and it was one of those things, if you told people how bad it was, they would say, no, come on. NBC or whatever is not going to let a show on the air that's this bad. Well, I'd say, well, why don't you watch it? I believe only something like about 3 or 4 episodes were shown before it was taken off the air. So Mullaney, doing a stand-up act, and he was appearing on Seth Meyers' show regularly, and he showed up last fall wearing a pair of sunglasses, and he appeared to be coked out or methed out or whatever of his mind, the things that he said. And then it was announced that he was going to rehab. So then he came out of rehab and said, oh, by the way, I'm divorcing my wife. And oh, by the way, I met this woman in church. Church, eh? Is that where a lot of hookups happen? And her name is Olivia Munn. And we are an item now. Okay, that seems rather arbitrary. Olivia Munn. Let's see. She's 41 this year. Getting a bit long in the tooth for a Hollywood starlet, which is what she is. And I know her only because she's constantly, in the gossip columns, and she had a sitcom on NBC. It was about young couples. This was about a decade ago. It was not successful. I don't know whether it lasted a whole year. She was cute. I can say that about her. There's a story by Sarah Nathan and Emily Smith in the New York Post, page 6 of the New York Post. John Mullaney has announced to the world that he's expecting a baby with Olivia Munn. Yeah, okay. This is not a fake relationship, because my new unexpected girlfriend is having a baby. Of course, pregnancies are routinely faked in Hollywood now. The now sober comic has made a big deal about falling for the actress in the spring, shortly leaving after a stint in rehab for cocaine and alcohol abuse. After plummeting into intense spiral of addiction, Mullaney, 39, spent several months in rehab in 2020, leaving his most recent 2-month stay in February. Also in February, he asked his wife of nearly 7 years, Anna Marie Tendler, for a divorce. Mullaney told Seth Meyers, I went to rehab in September. I got out in October. I moved out of my home from my ex-wife. Then in the spring, I went to Los Angeles and met and started to date a wonderful woman named Olivia. I got into this relationship that's been really beautiful with someone incredible, and we're having a baby together. He said that in fact, he met Munn at Meyers' wedding in 2013, but this timeline seems to be tenuous. It seems that they have known each other for quite a long time. But here's the best part. Munn has dated a string of high-profile men, including Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers and Hollywood hunk Chris Pine. So, I mean, once could be coincidence, but twice. Olivia Munn is a beard for gay men who do not want to come out of the closet. And now she's with John Mullaney, and that's a pretty odd aspect of this story. At least it seems to me. No Sleep Till Breezewood says, no way a 31-year-old giving birth unless some mad scientist antics going on. Steve says, weddings are actually great places to meet women. Okay, but the original story was that they met in church. It didn't specify a wedding. I know that weddings are great places to meet women, but the original story gave the impression that, I don't know, that John Mullaney was seeking, spiritual guidance, and he happened to run into Olivia Munn, who was similarly seeking spiritual guidance. Popcasso 88 says, is Mullaney hooking up with Olivia Munn? Certainly suggests it. It certainly suggests it. Chokin 666 says she used to do a video game show. Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. I used to run into that, well, channel surfing. What do they call it? The game show network or whatever. See, and it was all this low res. It was really low res and cheap. And I'm a pretty girl and I like video games. I'm a nerd. I'm such a nerd. You guys love nerds, don't you? Yes, we love nerd girls. We love brainy nerd girls like you. Yeah, that is such an obvious con. Metal Mike says Trudeau is lying. He won't do it. He's saying it because it's a hot topic and he is desperate. No Sleep says Trudeau courting the Wignat vote by jamming immigrants into pods. Does anyone know how many jackets KMG has? I believe I have about 8. I believe I have 8. I mean, sports coats, you know. Rumpelstiltskin says Joe again, 666. I don't know. I miss her old Twitter, you know, where she obviously had a few, and she would have this conversation with herself about, you know, maybe she should run for leader of the party. And what was that Stuart Smalley line? You know, I'm something enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. It was always the same, you know. It always ended that way. Okay, did she host Halfwits? No, that was Eugene Levy, who was impersonating what? Alex Trebek? All fandoms develop girl groupie subcultures. I don't believe for a moment that Olivia Munn likes nerds. Very few women like nerds, unless they have, I don't know, a lot of money. And by a lot of money, I mean a lot of money. Picasso 88 says Michelle Rempel is a crazy wine ant. Okay. And, okay, let's, I know there's going to be some groans here, but I'm in this for the long haul. We are going back to Joseph Tainter's 1988 book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. So he's talking about the various theories about what collapse of civilization means. And he talks about, well, let's see, talks about Toynbee. And he says there are major difficulties with this view and specific reasons why it is not faithful. The reader will have noticed that while the fall of civilizations was discussed by way of introductory material in the first chapter, that term has since been avoided and for the most part will continue to be. There are 2 reasons for this. First, the definition of what constitutes a civilization tends to be vague and intuitive. And secondly, there is an almost unavoidable element of unscientific value judgment in the very concept. Petirim Sorokin is particularly noted for criticism of the death of civilization's idea. He correctly points out that at any point where such a death is postulated, there is nonetheless much continuity in cultural behavior from the dying civilization to the emerging one. That is certainly true. Moreover, specific parts of cultural systems change continuously, so the qualitative transformation to a new civilization is difficult to pinpoint. He asserts as well that human cultures are not unified in any event, merely chance amalgamations of features, so that by definition they cannot cease to exist. On this last point, most current social scientists would agree with Sorokin, but that matter leads away from the discussion. The question of value judgments is equally serious. What distinguishes civilized from uncivilized societies? Anthropologists have long recognized that the very terms are value-laden. In popular thought, civilized societies are superior. How do we recognize a civilized society? By such things as refined art styles, monumental architecture, and literary and philosophical traditions that seem akin to our own experiences. Civilizations display artistic, architectural, and literary styles that are similar in structure, if not in form and content, to our own. Hence, civilized societies are those like us. Many authors, supposed scientists, are blatant about their value judgments to the point of embarrassment. Gray, for example, characterized the Greek Archaic period as crude. Clough defined civilization as achievement in aesthetic and intellectual pursuits and success in controlling the physical environment. A more civilized people is more successful in these. Kroeber, one of the masters of this field, made reference to higher cultural values and forms assigned to ancient Egypt, a fairly high idea system, and referred to cultural patterns, which we judge as high quality. In a study of history, Toynbee asserted that civilizations are in their nature progressive movements. Spengler was curiously different. To him, civilizations are undesirable, even evil. Quote, they are a conclusion, death following life, rigidity following expansion. They are an end, irrevocable, yet by inward necessity reached again and again, unquote. Such biases have no place in objective social science, and a concept that is so laden with this problem is better abandoned or rethought. Not all have approached the concept so uselessly. Melko characterizes civilizations as large complex structures and is echoed in this by Flannery and Colburn. Somewhat refined, such a definition will more clearly fit the present study. A civilization is the cultural system of a complex society. The features that popularly define a civilized society, such as great traditions of art and writing, are epiphenomena or covariables of social, political, and economic complexity. Complexity calls these traditions into being, for such art and literature serve social and economic purposes and classes that exist only in complex settings. Civilization emerges with complexity, exists because of it, and disappears when complexity does. Complexity is the base of civilization, and civilization, by definition here, can disappear only when complexity vanishes. It may be true that specific polities can rise and fall within a civilization, but political complexity itself must disintegrate for civilization to disappear. For this reason, the study of rising and falling complexity serves as a monitor of the phenomenon called civilization, a monitor that is at once measurable and specifiable, and no less subject to the biases and value judgments of other approaches. The concept of civilization is thus obviated for present purposes. Does this mean that the work of the cultural school is not pertinent to the study of collapse? Surely the popularity of this school would itself argue against this supposition. But there are other reasons for considering the works of Spengler, Toynbee, Kroeber, and others, and indeed considering these in some detail. The inextricable link between complexity and civilization, even if denied or unrecognized by this school, indicates the discussion of why civilizations disappear will be pertinent to understanding why polities do. More basically, though, the approach to selecting works to consider in this chapter dictates their inclusion. Some of the work to be discussed pertains, for example, to societies that never did collapse, such as the Byzantine and Ottoman empires. Such cases are included, along with the theories of the cultural school, because of the importance not only of political collapse, but also of circumstances that could lead to this condition. Thus, theories of the end of civilizations and discussions of political weakness will receive prominent treatment. And we'll have more from Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Society tomorrow. William Briggs has one of the best blogs out there. You will have noticed that I refer to him often on many different subjects. He is a statistician, but with a wide interest in many aspects of, well, civilization. And his piece today, which you can find at wmbriggs.com, is called Capitalism is Dead, Long Live the Expertocracy, Burnham's The Managerial Revolution at 80. James Burnham wrote The Managerial Revolution, What is Happening in the World, in 1941 to argue that capitalism was waning and being replaced everywhere by managerialism. He was right. The term managerialism, though Burnham had good reason to use it, does not sing to us and is not now as accurate as we'll see. I propose instead expertocracy, the rule of credentialed experts. This is far from an original suggestion. Managers, to Burnham, were trained men adept at directing people and in understanding the mechanisms of production. To us, however, a manager works at McDonald's. Experts far better captures the nature of our ruling class. Burnham lays out the history of feudalism and its transition to capitalism and how technological innovation in machines and money overturned the old system like the blob eating through a company picnic. Moneylenders and traders insinuated themselves into feudal culture, gradually making themselves lords and masters of the world. Custom and law became capitalist in nature. The strange concepts of making a profit, loans, interest, free employment, and so on became known to all, and so much so that nobody now thinks how extraordinary and unusual these are. Nations and nationalism were the direct result of capitalist encroachment into the ruling class. Parliaments, we call it Congress, representatives of capitalists and capitalism, and not lords and kings, became the dominant ruling bodies designed to protect capitalist interests and resolve disputes among capitalists. Because capitalism, like all forms of government, has its weaknesses, it is not universally loved. It did, however, provide enough funds to create a learned leisure class. This was the beginning of the expert. These experts went to work designing, in theory, an ideal society. Late in the 19th century and into the 20th, the bien-pensants knew the world would soon spontaneously transform from capitalism to socialism, a complete classless society, a utopia of equality and egalitarianism, a world without elites where the masses would rule themselves. Be careful, because here's another word that has grown out of its skin. Socialism now roughly translates to Burnham's managerial economy. Socialism, in its original definition, was always an expert fantasy. A classless society would be impossible by definition to enforce. Who would do the enforcing? And only works in theory on infinitely plastic people. Theory is, as we now know, a powerful driver of expert behavior, a point Burnham had not yet had the opportunity of seeing. Indeed, Burnham was unable to disguise his admiration of managers. In any case, because of the love of theory, the idea of true socialism and equality have not left us. They are still aspired to. Burnham's approach was, as he emphasizes, often scientific. Though he couldn't at times resist falling into scientism, who could? He did his best to predict what would happen, not what he wanted to happen or what he thought was best. He matured this theme in the Machiavellians 2 years later by bringing in the ideas of Machiavelli, Mosca, Pareto, and others. There, too, he didn't recognize his or their occasional scientism and tended to be too dismissive of the role religion and metaphysical beliefs play in the elite. They all knew ideology drove the masses, but let that pass. He started with basic premises of human nature and historical observation, not of words, but of deeds. The two rarely match. This allowed him to define basic terms. Quote, a ruling class means a group of people who, by virtue of special social economic relations, exercises a special degree of control over access to the instruments of power and receives preferential treatment in the distribution of the product of these instruments, unquote. Briggs comments, there always has been, and therefore we predict there always will be a ruling class. The masses, except in unusual, brief, riotous circumstances, are never in charge and are always willing to be led, grumble as they might. That, plus the observation that there is always a struggle among men for preeminence, is all the theory that is needed. From these premises, and on some basic human nature bolstered by a few simple observations, Burnham deduced the rise of managerialism, which happened the following way. In capitalism, the owners did as they wanted with their money, their factories, their land, their employees. Ancient feudal customs and language faded or were repurposed. Robber barons, railroad barons. The masses had some liberty to pursue employment without being tied to a specific piece of land. Capitalists could hire and fire whom they pleased, produce what they liked, start and stop their businesses at will, largely free of all restraints, except those arising from the machinations of other capitalists. Gradually, technology and learning increased. Managing people, the science of logistics, and the creation of increasingly complex machines soon required expertise beyond knowing how to shift money around. Many capitalists were unwilling to learn these schools, so they retired from public life to enjoy their wealth, leaving the running of things to managers. These managers were expert, small e, and educated, small e, and their ascension to the ruling class was natural. The same people came out of the same universities where attendance is now de rigueur, went in and out of the same corporations, and in and out of the same bureaucracy and formal government positions. Loyalties in the ruling class shifted from companies and the nation to the managerial class itself, which became more and more international. Nations still exist, of course, and while there are here and there nationalist resurgences, the trend to large managerial groupings across nations can't be shaken off. Consider the explosion of grief and fury in the expertocracy over both Trump and Brexit. Indicative is a Yale professor talking to the New York Times recently to argue that the USA should be governed by international law. Since by definition there could be no such thing in or above sovereign nations, sovereignty must lie outside the nation. Where? What the Yale professor meant is that the expertocracy, he, should rule. This kind of argument applied to all areas will become increasingly compelling. Burnham thought the transition to managerialism would by now be complete, especially in the forms then evinced in Germany and Russia, which were already then nearly fully managed societies regardless of the outcome of the war. In the Machiavellians, 1943, in a rare blown forecast, he foresaw the U.S. winning the war and becoming a military-based managerial society. Again, technology created by capitalists beat out these predictions. We're still not wholly an expertocracy. Even so, encroachments of the expert ruling class into more areas of life continues inexorably. And let's get to the present. The parliamentary system, which grew with capitalism, must continue to fade and has already faded to a considerable degree. Who declares war today? Parliaments or executives? One after the other, says Burnham. The executive bureaus took into their hands the attributes and functions of sovereignty. The bureaus became the de facto lawmakers. The expertocracy has also grown outside these structures and inside what we now call big tech and woke capital. Who banned a sitting president from using the internet? Congress or experts? Who regulates speech, the flow of goods, privacy? The Centers for Disease Control, an unelected, as people like to complain, bureaucracy, decreed that landlords could not control their own property and charge rent. This dictate, the result of expert modeling, a melange of math and alchemy, became de facto law. There is no voting in the expertocracy in any sense as we used to know it. The only thing slowing the complete disappearance of capitalism is revolutionary. The word is overused, but here apt, technology. We can recall when the internet was not under expert control. It was like the Wild West. All was allowed. Development was almost solely in the hands of the capitalists. They never would have called themselves that. Innovation kept baying forces of expert regulation under control. It soon arrived, however, as experts, terrified of the liberty, reined it all in. What was strange was that the capitalists who created the Wild West transformed themselves into experts or had their firms invaded by experts. Naturally, some capitalists learned to identify as experts. Individual bosses who became experts know they are not only in charge of this company, but they are themselves in the ruling class. They didn't see themselves as capitalists, but experts. This explains how the German Green Party received its largest ever donation from a Dutch tech entrepreneur, while the second largest donation in Germany was from a Bitcoin investor. Power is diffuse in an expertocracy and less visible. Just who is in charge? Everybody and nobody. We should be worried. Burnham says the combined forces of the old managers and old government will provide the basis for domination and exploitation by a ruling class in extremity and absoluteness never known before. The masses will acquiesce in the removal of ancient liberties as they do in all things. They hated hearing at first that they will own nothing and be happy. Yet soon they will own nothing and be happy, where that word will take on a technical, quantitative meaning defined by experts. One thing Burnham missed was that journalism rose as a political force under capitalism. In capitalist cultures, it was often used as propaganda to wage wars against rivals and, of course, to display advertising. Experts have taken it over almost completely now, so that at the top it is almost all propaganda. Experts consolidated journalism to provide one unified voice. They always desire unity in all things within their regional spheres. Funny that they call this unity diversity. True capitalism is never coming back, just as true socialism is impossible. I'll just break in here to say that we've seen the switcheroo here. We're talking about what do vaccines do? Oh, well, we knew what vaccines did. And then the FDA, no, this is not what vaccines do. Vaccines do this as well. They act in this way as well. Oh, really? I mentioned marriage. We know what marriage is. two sexes, one marriage. No. It can be, anybody. Oh, we'll just redefine it. And we see this with capitalism. Capitalism, okay. People save money. They loan it to banks at interest, which then loan it at higher interest to businesses which are starting out or expanding. No, that's not how capitalism works anymore. It isn't. Saving is bad. It is? No. Saving, people who save money are selfish. And they are, they're not allowing the economy to operate as it should. Well, where does the money come from then? Well, the banks create it. Oh, okay. Yeah, the banks create it. Or the Federal Reserve, which is run by private banks, creates money in various ways and then helicopters it to the banks. So it's unnecessary for people to save money. Let's see. This appeared last night. Too late to make it into the post proper. Moldbug / Yarvin says Burnham's The Machiavellians is a better book than The Managerial Revolution, and this is so, but only because it's broader and accounts for the thinking of others of like minds. In his suppositions of the rise of the expertocracy, Burnham was right, as we see. Yarvin also highlights, and obviously I agree, the diffuse nature of power of the deep state, which is best called our expertocracy. And we see this playing out with COVID-19. What, you thought your elected representatives were in charge? No. You see, some time ago, and it could have been decades ago, some public health measure was approved. And that means that unelected bureaucrats have the power to do anything they want. And by anything I want, going so far as to say you are not allowed to leave your home. You're not allowed to leave your home. And so-called non-essential businesses will be shuttered. And people have to wear masks. And they have to keep 6 feet or 2 meters apart. And now they have to be jabbed. 1 jab, 2 jab, 3 jabs, and then more. And yeah, again, who's in charge? I mean, Briggs is absolutely right. The expertocracy is in charge. And this should put paid once and for all for the illusion of democracy that Burnham rightly mocked in The Machiavellians, which, of course, we discussed at great length in this space. So what does Sleepy Joe have in mind? This is from Business Insider. Channeling frustration towards the unvaccinated, Biden announces a slew of new requirements to combat the Delta variant. This is not about freedom of personal choice, Biden said. It's about protecting yourself and those around you. Yes, just like in the Soviet Union, when people were rounded up and thrown into the gulag and then later mental asylums. This isn't about freedom or personal choice. It's about safety, because these people were wreckers and they were a danger, not just to Soviet society, but to all of you personally. See, we've adopted a Soviet mentality, and we congratulate ourselves for it. The plan includes a federal employee vaccine mandate, double TSA fines for not wearing masks, and more. Many of us are frustrated with the nearly 80 million Americans who are still not vaccinated, Biden said. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Not anymore, it isn't. The efficacy of the vaccines has collapsed. So we need more jabs. Everyone needs to be jabs. The plan includes 6 parts: vaccinating the unvaccinated, including new mandates for federal employees and an OSHA rule mandating large employers require vaccinations or weekly testing. Further protecting the vaccinated, including a booster program. Yeah! Jab number 3 to be rolled out by September 20th, keeping schools safely open, including a new vaccine requirement for Head Start program teachers and staff. Increasing testing and requiring masking, including using the Defense Production Act to boost the availability of rapid and at-home test kits. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to getting one of those tests where it's like that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Get Your Ass to Mars, when he has to shove this thing up his nose into his brain I gather that's what these tests are like, but it's for your own good. Protecting the economic recovery, including strengthening the COVID Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, improving COVID-19 treatments, including a 50% boost in weekly shipments of monoclonal antibody treatments to states. But the resistance is before I get to the resistance, or as they would say back when Trump was president, la résistance. Biden in December 2020, this is from CNSnews.com, I don't think COVID vaccinations should be mandatory. Okay. So I guess the science has changed, as it always does, except whatever the latest iteration of science is always written in stone, and one can't disagree with it because one then becomes guilty of misinformation or disinformation and is murdering people. But no, the masks haven't worked, the lockdowns haven't worked, the social distancing hasn't worked, the vaccinations hasn't worked because the number of cases keeps increasing. But we need more of the same, obviously, until the number of vaccinated reaches 105% of the population. Well, maybe then we could, reconsider. 72%, this is from Breitbart, 72% of the unvaccinated said they would rather quit their job than get the vaccine if their company enacted a vaccine mandate. That sounds like a pretty stiff resistance to me. A lot of companies already have trouble hiring workers because a great many people would quite reasonably rather take free government money than go to work. And let's look, hang on just a second here. Let's just check this out. I apologize for being dilatory. And here we go. Glenn Greenwald points out the unvaccinated in America are overwhelmingly low-income people, which means any punitive measures against those refusing vaccinations, loss of jobs, bar on entrance to public spaces or travel, will fall disproportionately on those who are most economically vulnerable. People who have not received the coveted vaccine by household income, less than $25,000 income a year, that's household income, 7 million. 25,000 to 35,000, about 4.4 million. 35,000 to 50,000, about 4.3 million. 50,000 to 75,000, now this is interesting, about 5.1 million. That's solidly middle class there. I suppose it could be pointed out that this is going to disproportionately and really disproportionately hurt first Black and then Hispanic people. But in this case, I suppose we'll make an exception for this disparate impact. Max Fawcett writes in the National Observer, no, we don't need to hear out the anti-vaxxers. We've heard enough from these people. They're killing everything. Section 1 of the Charter writes the so-called Oakes test that is applied to its invocation lays out the conditions under which a constitutionally guaranteed right can be limited. And the way that Max sees it, that means that our constitutionally protected freedoms are essentially worthless. Section 1 says the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in its subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Free. The word free is in there. So presumably that would mean that there would be a freedom test. But no, there's no freedom test because freedom is for suckers. Freedom is for murderers. As to hearing them out, we've been doing that for over a year now. Well, everything that the skeptics predicted has come true. But that only makes people like Max Fawcett hate us more. As Tom Wolfe pointed out some decades ago, One doesn't want to be right too early. People are getting alarmed that Maxime Bernier and his People's Party of Canada is shooting up in the polls. They're well ahead of the Green Party, and apparently even topping the Bloc Québécois, despite the fact of an unofficial, semi-official media blackout of them. Except this from Max. Bernier isn't about to back down here in a Leni Riefenstahl-esque video shot at a September 5 rally in Kelowna. I've seen news clips of Triumph of the Will. I think most of us have. You know, the serried ranks of tens of thousands and their uniform motions. Max Bernier's rallies are nothing like that at all, but Max couldn't resist the opportunity to compare. Max Fawcett couldn't resist the opportunity to compare Maxime Bernier to Adolf Hitler. This is leftist reasoning, leftist dialectic. Anyone who disagrees with me is literally Hitler. And I suppose the most frightening thing about this is that a great deal of the time, they actually mean it. Andrew Coyne obviously thinks that Maxime Bernier is a very bad man indeed, but I must give him credit for writing in the Globe that Bernier should have been represented at the leaders' debates. Good for you, Andrew. Do we have anything new from Alex Berenson at Substack? A chart of COVID deaths in Britain since June. Remember what they told you? They told you the vaccines might not stop infections or transmissions, but they were still very effective against serious illness and death. 89% of Britons over 16 have received at least one shot. 80% are fully vaccinated. And then you look at the chart, and deaths in the United Kingdom among the vaccinated, and as Berenson says, something is very, very wrong. Very wrong indeed. And of course, in Canada and the United States, they're going to keep up the pretense for as long as they can. That since we were vaccinated in great numbers after, sometimes considerably later than, those people in England and in Israel, they're just going to keep pretending that the physiology of people in Israel and in England is just fundamentally different from the physiology of people in Canada, in the United States. But they can't keep this up for much longer. And we'll have a quick look at the Daily Skeptic, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. Okay. Here we go. COVID vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds are being considered despite not being recommended by the JCVI. Former NHS consultant Dr. John Lee, the medium and long-term risks are unknown. It's just wrong to suggest for a potential societal benefit that you should do this. In the war between authoritarian public health and science, science lost. This is a piece by Toby Young, who writes, there's a terrific piece in the Tablet by John P.A. Ioannidis, a professor of medicine at Stanford, and among a small group of scientists who've been willing to publish research that runs counter to the official COVID narrative about what has gone wrong in the scientific and public health communities in the past 18 months. In essence, the scientific values of skepticism, disinterestedness, and transparency have been thrown aside as the pandemic has become politicized, creating an opening for a new breed of experts to influence public health policy, while at the same time advancing their commercial and political interests. President Eisenhower saw it all coming. Yes, he did. I've talked about this before, but it cannot be repeated often enough. Again, this is from Toby Young. We're publishing an original essay today by Cephas Alain the pseudonym of a retired lawyer, about President Dwight Eisenhower's extraordinarily prescient farewell address in 1961, when he warned of the growing power of the military-industrial complex. As the LBC radio host and commentator Majid Nawaz has pointed out, if you substitute big pharma industrial complex, then many of Eisenhower's warnings have come to pass. Actually, Eisenhower specifically warned against scientism, about the worship of scientism. And, these people who, oh, yes, remember the good old days of Dwight Eisenhower? Boy, I sure wish that the Republicans would go back to great men like him. Of course, at the time in 1952, Harry Truman, who was extraordinarily bitter about being knocked out of the Democratic race, he was still president at the time, on the campaign trail, openly accused Eisenhower of sympathy with Nazism. Yeah, he did. But we're told, we're told that, oh, yes, this nastiness in politics, Trump invented that, or I don't know, Maxime Bernier invented that. It's all nonsense. Politics have always been nasty. Let's see. Here's something that Eisenhower said in his farewell address. Research has become central, and it also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor tinkering in his shop has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal government, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. How about that? And before I go to Theater Thursday, go back to the chat. What does Ogan's Iron have to say that people are agreeing with? Popcasso88 says, I had an appointment to get vaxxed today, and I got cold feet at the last minute. Now, I can't tell people whether they should get vaxxed or not. In fact, if I were to speak out strongly, forcefully on one side of this issue, I would be banned. But nonetheless, I will say this. When I read more about the specifics of the mRNA delivery, which is not a vaccination as we have traditionally understood it, and the potential consequences of this, the more that this terrifies me. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. When they turn on 6G, it's going to be like that movie Scanners, exploding heads everywhere, says Kontiki Roulette. Yeah, he blew up good, real good. Okay, I guess you didn't get the memo. The vaccines works. Did you hear that? It works. The science is clear on that. Okay, I attended an anti-pass protest last weekend. It looked huge and it felt good to see so many people, said Ogan's Iron. Okay, I lived in all three. When you encounter strangers, you acknowledge them in an unobtrusive, friendly manner. Okay. I wonder what kind of situation that is, Because it was a joke back in New York in the 1980s when mugging hit its peak that, you made eye contact with someone? It's like you brought it on yourself. There are many people, including right outside my hotel, a few steps from here, that I make a point of not making eye contact with, because at the very least, they are going to ask for a free cigarette or cigarettes from me. And at the very worst, they're going to lunge at me or start screaming incomprehensible threats, obscenities, etc. I will roam this wasteland of abandoned shopping malls and condos after the collapse, armed with a crossbow and spiked baseball bat, accompanied by my faithful hound and a feral child, says Steve. Can you get a treatment worked up? Melinda Gates used to like nerds, says Metal Mike. Well, didn't she come up with the unlamented Bob at Microsoft? Oh, yeah, she was a nerd herself. No, she was never a coder, and she wasn't good at her job, such as it was. But she was willing to go out with Bill Gates, or William Henry Gates the Fourth, as he is. Do you know the story about this? Bill Gates' father fought in the Second World War, and his name was William Henry Gates the Third. And he thought, if people find out that's my name, I'm going to get beaten up regularly. So he changed his name to William Henry Gates Jr. So that is to say, rightfully, Bill Gates of Microsoft is called William Henry Gates IV. When he delivered his pitch to IBM in Boca Raton, one of the most important events in modern history, someone on the IBM board said, "Isn't he Mary Gates's son?" And Mary Gates was a bigwig in the United Way in Seattle. So that is to say, I'm not discounting, Gates's audacity, but he didn't exactly come out of nowhere. So just let me open up a couple of tabs here, and then we will talk about Jacques Tati and his movie Playtime. Jacques Tati was born in 1907, and he died in 1982. His name wasn't Tati. It was Tatishev. And his father was a white Russian. Many white Russians fled to France after the revolution. So he was Russian on one side, and his mother was half French and half Dutch. Despite the fact that he was not French in any way, certainly in terms of his breeding, to many people in France and around the world, Jacques Tati, particularly his character Monsieur Hulot, became synonymous with the Frenchman. Tati began as a nightclub, a burlesque, a performer, a mime, famed from an early age for his physical comedy. After the war, he got into films, and he made comedies which are largely dependent on physical humor, sight gags, and Playtime, which is the grandest example of his oeuvre, is almost entirely a series of sight gags. There's no plot to speak of. 1953, Tati released a film called Les Vacances de Monsieur Hulot, or Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. And so we find the creation of this character, sort of a bumbling man with his suede walking shoes with the rubber soles, with his short overcoat with his trilby, with his pipe. I suppose you could say that Ulo obviously had an enormous influence on Mr. Bean. His next film was called Mon Oncle, My Uncle, won an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. And Tati's, again, we're talking about a time here when a lot of people in North America were eager to see foreign films. This period lasted until, what, the early 1970s? I would say maybe as long as 1975. Now, foreign films are, well, poison. But there were a lot of university students then. Of course, there are a lot of university students now, a lot more. But the university student of the day wanted to be considered sophisticated, so he went to foreign films and he listened to jazz music, like Dave Brubeck. And he would have prints of abstract expressionists on his wall. Yes, I know. Sounds crazy, right? But it's true. So Playtime came out in 1967. And it has subsequently been acclaimed by the critics. In the Sight and Sound poll, it was ranked, 43rd? The 43rd greatest film ever made in the 2012 Sight and Sound Critics poll. I'll get back to Playtime in just a minute. As I say, not a success. It was enormously expensive, and I'll explain why. It was pretty much the end of his career, actually. That he made a film called Traffic, which is really a jumped-up TV film. And then his last film, Parade, in 1973. Well, it's a filmed circus performance. Amusingly, curiously, fascinating to me, for the longest time, Tati wanted to make a film with Ron Mael and Russell Mael of Sparks, and talks about this and attempts to raise money for this went on for years and years and years, but nothing happened. As I mentioned before, similarly, there was a attempt by the Mael brothers to make a film with a Taiwanese director named Hark Sai, and that discussions on that and attempts to raise money went on for years and years and years. Nothing happened, but happily, there is a film this year called Annette, which the Sparks brothers have collaborated with Leos Karas. And so that is very good news. It would have been fascinating to see a Tati film with Sparks. But let's get to Playtime. This is a big film, big in every way. It is filmed in 70 millimeter. And when one learned, watching the film, right from the very beginning, you think, okay, I know what he's getting at here. He's making fun of the international style in architecture. But, okay, so in 1967, there obviously would be international style buildings in Paris, but not all of Paris looks like that. And then it's just gasp inducing. Oh my God, these are sets. Some of the most stupendous sets ever built, both exterior and interior. International style. Essentially an anonymous form of architecture, which ruled for decades after the Second World War, much mocked even at the time. You can read about this in Tom Wolfe's from Bauhaus to our house. I'll just read from Wikipedia here. It is defined by the Getty Research Institute as a style of architecture that emerged in Holland, France, and Germany after World War I and spread throughout the world, becoming the dominant architectural style until the 1970s. The style is characterized by an emphasis on volume over mass, the use of lightweight, mass-produced industrial materials, the rejection of all ornament and color, repetitive modular forms, and the use of flat surfaces, typically alternating with areas of glass. Yes, the glass box, as they called it. And in Tati's Playtime, which he directed and co-wrote, it's all international style. And this is in a way, it's a nightmare version of Paris, where the city of Haussmann, Napoleon III, has been swept away by the international style. Building after building after building after building, block after block, the whole city, just identical glass boxes. And there is an exquisite moment, which we see twice in this film, where, of course, all the doors are made of glass, big, heavy plate glass, and a door is open so that it's tilted. So we see a reflection of the Eiffel Tower. You see, that's the only way that it can be witnessed, because these international style skyscrapers, there are no views left anymore. And later in the film, we see another door, glass door, open and tilted, and we see Sacré-Cœur, because that is the only way that it can be seen. Of course, both Sacré-Cœur and the Eiffel Tower were built to dominate the skyline, to be visible from miles away. But in this movie, they have been effectively effaced. Now, I mentioned that there is no plot in this film. We have Monsieur Hulot, and he goes somewhere for some purpose. What that purpose is, we don't know. In any event, he is frustrated at every level. That he goes from room to room to room to room to elevator to different floor and across the street, and these functionaries have no time for him. The interior sets are just extraordinary. Again, this would have been like Steve Jobs's, I won't use a crude word. Let's just say his idea of heaven, that everything is glass and burnished aluminum. And one of the physical jokes is that the floors, there are no carpets, because carpets are old-fashioned and dirty, right? The floors are so highly polished that Hulot is constantly slipping and sliding on these floors. And there's much made of a kind of a knockoff of the Barcelona chair, that it's a miracle of design, apparently, that it never gets saggy, and it's designed so that you hear this noise when someone sits at it, or when they push back, you can hear it deflate, and then when you get up, it reflates again. And apparently, this can be done infinitely. I should point out that the sound design is extraordinarily important in this film. You would have to go to Robert Bresson to find a director who was as obsessed with sound design as Tati is in this film and some of his others. A great many of the jokes are simply based on sounds, exaggerated sounds. Now, given this is the 1960s, that people had a particular idea of computers. And the idea was that there were lots of flashing lights. Also, they made sounds like beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep. So then you knew it was a computer. Of course, the computers that we see in Playtime are rather sinister, and there's very much a kind of a Tex Avery aspect to this. that you're introduced to the world of tomorrow. And you know it's going to go wrong. You know things are going to start to go wrong. And in the penultimate scene in a nightclub, yes, they do go wrong in a very big way. Now, there's a great deal of product placement in this film that would never be allowed today, because he's making fun of these companies, and it's a globalist world that he is depicting back in 1967. Now we see a lot of American tourists, and he doesn't hate Americans. He's not making fun of them, not really. But the point is that Paris is becoming dominated by foreigners, and they're imposing American or globalist ideas on Paris, on France. Later, we see a voluble CEO at a trade fair who's German. And it doesn't really matter where these people come from, because it's the world of the corporation. This movie came out a year before Kubrick's 2001. And I'm thinking it's a fascinating contrast, because, again, 2001 is depicting the world of tomorrow. But you get there's a different affect there, because people watching 2001, the airport in space, and all of the furnishings, everything is airy, the whiteness of it. People are supposed to go, ooh, cool, futuristic. Whereas in Playtime, the audience is meant to go, this is creepy. This is highly creepy. Everything human seems to have been rigorously extirpated from everything that we see. There's so many. I'll say, I'll give you a warning about this film. It's 124 minutes long. There is no plot. It's a series of sight gags. Okay. If you have, attention deficit disorder, don't watch this film, because it will infuriate you. This is something that you just have to sink into your chair and just relax and let it unfold before you. And, don't ask questions that the movie is not prepared to answer. There are many, many themes in this. Another one is life being taken over by meta considerations. There's the group of American tourists, and we see them being shuttled from one part of Paris to another, from the airport to their hotel and to various places. And they all seem genial enough. And there's a very good-looking woman called Barbara. And there's a particular scene which really stands out, because there's no color. Throughout almost all of the film, there's no color. The color has been drained from it. When Barbara appears at the restaurant / nightclub in a bright green dress, she almost causes a sensation, because why is she dressed like that? Like she's violating a code. She is standing out. But we see a flower stall in the corner of a street in Paris. And there's an old lady selling flowers. And she has two customers waiting to buy flowers. And Barbara shows up with her expensive camera and shoos away the customers. And for the next several minutes, we get her taking pictures of this woman who owns the flower shop. Now, Barbara is not interested that this is an actual business that is selling flowers and that some people like to buy flowers. And she's actually turning away custom from this woman that she could, buy some flowers herself. But no, she's not interested in that because the whole world exists in her eyes for her to make it meta. so that when she returns home, she can have her pictures developed and say, this is Paris. It's obviously far more important than her memories of being in Paris. That is to say, if something can't be, quantified, if it doesn't exist in some sort of documentary form, then it doesn't really exist. We see. I'll mention that the scene in the offices where Hulo is, sort of goes, back and forth to no avail. There's a great scene where he's ushered into this rather large room, which is almost featureless, except for these sort of pseudo Barcelona chairs. But there are these great portraits of, I don't know, supposed worthies, where it's never explained to us who they are supposed to be, but they all have the buttonhole of the Legion of Honor on their lapels. So we know that they're really solid citizens. In the trade exhibition part of the film, well, here's something that's prescient. We're shown a bunch of stupid inventions, such as a door that you can slam and it doesn't make a noise. Oh, you don't like the noise that slamming a door makes? Well, then don't slam doors. But this company has gone to great trouble to invent a process. Well, of course, the door is not made of wood. It looks like wood, for instance. And, you can wrap your umbrella against it and it doesn't make any noise. Also, a broom with headlamps. And we see people at the trade fair and, ooh, a broom with headlamps. And of course, the joke is, no one could have known in 1967 that just, 3 decades later, it would be de rigueur for every vacuum cleaner above a certain price point to have headlamps, so that nothing can hide from the modern vacuum cleaner. There's also a kind of a running gag in this film with authenticity of being, or I suppose you could say it's a meta joke about Monsieur Hulot representing France and Frenchmen, that there is an Hulot impersonator in the film that we see several times and causes a mischief for the real Hulot. And at one point, one of the American tourists, runs him down on the street and says, Mr. Huilot. And of course, it's not the same man. But I suppose this is a comment on a lack of individuality, because it's just brought home to us that, except for superficial differences in dress, everyone in the first half of the movie looks the same. The men look the same. The women look the same. I could point out that a lot of these women are very good looking, but it becomes oppressive. This is a movie which depicts Paris, well, over a period of 24 hours. I mean, right from the beginning to the end. Hulot is always being buttonholed by people who claim to have served in the war with him. And, I can't resist the entreaties of an old war buddy. He meets some successful businessman, and we are shown he dragoons him into visiting him at his ultra-modern apartment. And it's an extraordinary scene with just extraordinary set, and it's shot mostly from outside, almost silently. In fact, you could call Playtime a silent film. There is very little relevant dialogue in it at all. So he goes to this ultra-modern apartment, and it's a cube. And there's a cube next to it, and there's a cube above it, and a cube here, and these people are like animals in the zoo. Oh, and there's a television set that's recessed into the wall. And again, any hint of individuality is simply not permitted. And we're shown two of these apartments side by side with people mesmerized by television and essentially doing the same things that they don't have any interior lives. And they can boast about their prosperity through their purchase of soulless modern objects. So Hulot is invited to a restaurant slash nightclub called the Royal Garden, and the movie descends into anarchy here. I mentioned Tex Avery, and this is in Paris, but there's nothing Parisian about it at all. It could be anywhere in the world. Now, watching this, I was thinking of another French director that I love, Jean-Pierre Melville, and I was thinking Melville would love this restaurant nightclub because it was so up to date and so American. Whereas Playtime, it mocks this idea, and of course it's all Jim crack. The restaurant is not ready. The whole thing is ridiculously pretentious. Everything breaks down or is on the verge of breaking down. There's one gag which just gets better and better because of these ridiculous chairs, these iron chairs that people have to sit on, that have these spokes going up to a crown and the spokes coming out again. Waiters are constantly tearing their clothes on them, and we have one hapless waiter who gets his pants torn, so he's told he can't appear this way in front of the customers, and so he skulks outside. And meanwhile, all these other waiters, they get their clothes torn or their shoes destroyed. Because the tiles aren't firm and the floors are uneven, and there are pointless little steps which are supposed to be lit with lamps so that you won't trip over them, and the lamps are always going out. So this waiter loses more and more of his clothing and eventually is dressed completely in rags. But it is an American, one of those rich, expansive Americans who rather saves the day here, because he is determined that everyone is going to have a good time. There are two bands that play. The first one is some sort of ersatz South American band, which for some reason, despite the presence of Indian instruments, native Indian instruments, there's a salsa beat and a cocktail jazz piano. And then we have a Black American, which say jazz R&B band. They're pretty good. But then the electricity starts going and they flee, and there's no music. And the boisterous rich American asks if anyone can play the piano. And it turns out that Barbara, in her lovely green dress, she plays the piano. And what does she play? She plays the kind of music that would have been popular, say, in the 1930s or 40s on the piano. And the crowd loves it. And some middle-aged woman, some chanteuse, she shows up and starts singing, in the style of the chanteuses of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and the crowd is further delighted. The club restaurant is practically destroyed by the end of this evening, and one of the best bits is where there are two enormous plate glass doors with these button-like, handles. And Hulot, who's a figure of anarchy throughout the film, although there's nothing malicious about him, he inadvertently shatters one of these doors, but it's decided that we have to pretend that there's still a door. So the commissionaire, he's holding like this large, enormous brass button as if it is one of the door handles, and he pulls it away to let people in, and he closes the door after them, because appearances must be upheld. So people spill out onto the streets as the sun is rising, and they go to a drugstore / bar, Wow, these Parisian drugstores seem to sell everything, or did back in the time. And then a strange thing happens. Color returns to the city, and it's glorious and beautiful and heart warming. The American tourists, they return to the airport to go home, but not before Ulo has bought a beautiful scarf for Barbara and a little flower, which is, of course, a reference to her refusal to patronize the flower seller earlier in the movie. We have a number of would-be ballets. We see ballets of cars. We see ballets of men stumbling together. There is a hilarious shot taken from behind where we just see the one of those chairs with the wheels on it, and we see the man's legs, and he's at a counter, an airline counter, and he's answering all these queries. So we see him going like this, and going like this, and going like this. It is really quite good. Art Buchwald, the famed American columnist who wrote some English dialogue for it, appears 3 times, and you're not going to miss him. Why is he there? No reason. No reason at all. I mean, this is very close to what you could call pure film, you know. And this is one of the reasons why I love it. It is a completely immersive film, and it is audacious and gorgeous and very funny indeed. And it's available from the Criterion Collection, based on I believe a 2012 restoration, and it looks fantastic. So those are my thoughts on Jacques Tati's Playtime. Final look at the chat. Kevin, favorite Renoir joint? I'd have to give that some thought. Texas Feral Hog says we need to brand the discussion that the MSM is not having and start saying it in social media until the bigger streamers start using it, then push for right of center establishment media to mention. It's very good, though. Better than The Day After, says. Oh, Threads. Oh, we're talking about nuclear Holocaust films, are we? Yes, a comparison of Threads to The Day After. Apparently, the entire nation of Britain was traumatized after Threads came out in the 1980s. Kevin, you have to see Mr. Freedom, says Chogokin, a 666. Well, I will investigate that. Cantinflas versus Chaplin. I've only seen Cantinflas in the, what is it, Around the World in 80 Days? Is that what it was called? You had all these movies in the 60s and 70s about wacky people in balloons and wacky people in old-timey cars and wacky people in old-timey planes. That vogue lasted for about 10 years and then just completely disappeared. I wish these tools were better developed. KMG should be able to hover over comment and have pop-up window with that user's comments displayed to obtain wider view of what user is saying. Okay. All right. Past 3 junkies shooting up right on my block today. They were trying to be clandestine. LOL, says Chogokin 666. Okay. So that's it. Again, takeaway. Playtime is an amazing film. What are we going to discuss next week on Theater Thursday? A really outrageous film, which can be appreciated 2 ways. It can, as the stupid reviewers did, as just a straight out glorification of war and killing, or you can regard it another way as a very dark satire of militarism. I'm speaking, of course, of Paul Verhoeven's 1977 film Starship Troopers. And I said that Playtime is almost a silent film. Well, on September 23rd, I'm going to be discussing a real silent film, the first pure silent film I've discussed. It is from 1920 by Robert Vina. It's called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I guess, wow, Europe. On September 30th, a Danish classic from 1955, a tremendously moving film about religious belief. It's called Ordet by Carl Theodor Dreyer. And after many inquiries, in fact, pretty much relentless bullying from people that I know on Twitter, I've decided to dive in, and October 7th, I will discuss the first season of Babylon Berlin. Tomorrow on the book club, I am talking about Bernal Diaz's True History of the Conquest of New Spain, which is written from the perspective of a man who was there, who was a soldier in Cortez's army. The Conquest of Mexico, I like to call it the second greatest story ever told. On September 17th, a book by an anthropologist, UCLA anthropologist, Robert Edgerton, called Six Societies, which is a blast against cultural relativism. On Music Monday, on September 13th, I'm going to be talking about how the child ballads have been used in song in all manner of genres. And on September the 20th, I will be examining the question, what was trip hop? So that's it for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, I'm sorry to be so abject about this, but the clock is ticking down on me in terms of being evicted, and so I would really appreciate donations. My PayPal account is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to this live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.